Okay, so today is another anniversary. This one is the anniversary of my grandfather's death. I don't give a shit. My mom and her sisters and their spouses. I don't know if any of my cousins are participating or not. But also my grandmother. They're all going to the cemetery to meet at 4. And then afterwards, they're doing dinner at my grandma's house. And I'm pretty sure I'll be asked if I'm coming over there once they get back. At least the aunt that tries to include everybody as much as possible. The rest probably don't care. Which, I mean, I had this little imagined conversation with my mom in my head. My mom knows how I feel about him. As far as shortly after he died, I told her flat out that he, how did I put it? Something to the effect of he outlived his usefulness by about 33 years. Because when I was 8, every birthday, holiday, and everything was hijacked to talk about his death, right? Like, that's the way my life has been ever since. Okay, so my great grandpa died when I was 7, and my grandparents moved back from Oklahoma. They moved to Oklahoma with a job transfer when I was 6 weeks old. And then they moved back shortly after my great grandfather died, and around the time I was 8. So, from that point on, every single time there has been a birthday, a holiday, any special occasion, any opportunity for the family to get together, it was to, for him to obsess over his death. This shit's gonna kill me, that kind of stuff. All the time. And okay, so my imagined conversation. Well, see, I don't really know which is the more. I don't know. Okay, anyway, when he was in the hospital, so last year, he fell and broke his knee, or shattered his femur, hit his knee on like a chair or something. He was always bitching about all the junk that was in the place, or in the house, but never gave a shit enough to do anything about it himself, right? So he would just bitch at everybody else, and everybody else was expected to do it. So one day, when he's walking through without the cane that he was told several times he needed to be using, he tripped over this chair, hit his knee on it, shattered his femur, and of course everybody goes over there because there's some kind of ordeal, and he went down hard. And of course, since we live next door, we got over there pretty quick, right? And he's got like blood coming out his nose, and got a line of blood to the carpet, and all this stuff, and he just keeps saying, pick me up, and it's like, no. Your ass is staying down there. My mom, she's had like 12 knee surgeries herself, mostly replacements. And, my aunt that also lives next door was a nurse for 30 years, and they got to looking at his leg, and they're like, no. It's like there is no other option. We are calling 911, and, they're coming out. And the delay on that, I was the one pushing that more than anybody because I've been most frequently utilized for my strength, and I can be there and helpful and getting the old people's asses off the floor. And so if they could avoid calling 911 at all possible costs, they would, right? In spite of the fact that that's literally one of the things that they're there for, right? Is so if somebody falls and potentially gets hurt, even if they don't get hurt, you can actually call the non-emergency number if it's not something that somebody needs to go to the hospital for or whatever, and ask them to come help assist an old person in getting up after they fall. That is something they can do. But my family has always been very insistent on, we take care of our own, right? So we're not supposed to call anybody for assistance, right? So it doesn't matter if you're putting your entire family at risk of, physical injury or anything else. You're just supposed to do what you're supposed to do. That's just all there is to it, right? So, and there was also this little bit of a back and forth where before his death, it's like he and my grandmother had this contest of sorts between the two of them. Now, absolutely not spoken. I don't think they were necessarily cognitively aware of it, but one would fall and then the other would fall, and it was just this back and forth, and who all's going to come, so who's more important, mom or dad, right? And it got really old, right? It's always a matter of them just protesting like little children, generally anyway, or acting like little children, and doesn't matter if the nurse is telling them not to do something, the nurse daughter or whatever. If they're told not to do it, they're going to do it because they were told not to. So one of those, just out of spite, I'm going to do this anyway. And then when it goes badly, then, well, who cares? Yeah, maybe you said I shouldn't do it, but it's still your fault, right? Or something that you now have to deal with the consequences of because we're just freaking children. But anyway, so he fell in August, and it's like August 14th-ish. And I say that because I'm pretty sure my concert was on the 16th. It was a couple days later, and I was like, I am not missing my damn concert for this. It was like a Five Finger Death Punch and Marilyn Manson. It's like, I have had these tickets for a while. I don't give a shit. Y'all are going to stay here if that's where you want to be, but I am going to this fucking concert. But anyway, I did call 911 on my grandfather when he was laying there bleeding on the floor, even though I was supposed to wait on the youngest sister to get there with her husband, basically so they can make the executive decision, I guess. Yep, because my uncle that the youngest sister married, brought him into the family, right, is so much like my grandfather that it was basically he had to be the one to make the executive decision because dad's down and this is a bad situation, blah, blah, blah. It's like, oh, because nobody else has a fucking brain in their head. Right. Gotcha. But that was exactly how my family, my family has always been, right? My grandfather wanted everybody to cater to the illusion that he was the only one with the brain in his head, right? He was the smart one, right? Everybody else is just stupid, and mainly because they're women and all that kind of bullshit. So I digress. Anyway, when he got moved from the first hospital where he had surgery to fix his femur, where they put several pins and screws and whatnot in to rebuild. Then he ended up going to a rehab hospital on the south side. And one morning I woke up and I was kind of having this conversation with him in my head, right? So we're not actually physically having the conversation, but I woke up thinking, I have spent 33 years of my life mourning your death and you haven't died yet. And I will not mourn another day. And I haven't, right? So that was end of August, beginning of September, right? And so once I started setting boundaries with my family and not allowing them to have all the free access to my energy that they always have, right? Had, whatever. okay, so the twin flame thing came up, and it's the biggest thing that, like, I kept having these messages that came up about protecting my energy, setting boundaries, right? 10-10. And so I started taking classes at Inner Path, trying to learn how to do this, right? And the big thing was initially not being around them as much. But also, and I think my skating all the time, when I, was able to process through different levels of this whole thing, was part of me being able to pull back from my family. So I start taking the classes, and then, we talk about different rocks. We talk about, like, the colors and, like, how these are different things that energetically can help you to protect your energy and your boundaries, and to shield yourself, right, from the bad juju, which my family's full of. And okay, right, so I have a whole lot of rocks that serve this purpose in some way or another. This is my black obsidian. My as I was learning about things, like with the rocks and stuff, I woke up one morning, and it was like I was coming around right before I opened my eyes, right? And it was like somebody whispered in my ear, Mookite Jasper. So I am Mookite. And when I looked this up later, I don't remember what exactly it said, but something about essentially disconnecting from generational baggage, if you will. And that's not it, that's amethyst. I got red jasper in here somewhere. Anyway, the red jasper, now that I started carrying on me. I didn't have it in necklace form back then, but my ex and I, when we were in Alabama, or when I was in Alabama with him, because last I knew, I left his ass there, and I hope he's still there. Although that said, if I ever found out that he was back up here, I'd have no problem living down there, like in a heartbeat, because it was like so close to the beach. It was amazing. And I really liked just the salt in the air and all that fun stuff. It's my water. I gotta go where water is. But we went to New Orleans a lot, and I absolutely love New Orleans. And because it was like perfect for day trips, because we were living in freaking Mobile. So we were just like, well, it was like an hour and a half drive over there, ish. So we're wandering around one day, and we are going in these different stores and whatnot, and one of them is this metaphysical type of thing, and there's all sorts of rocks, right? The pretty rocks. So I started looking, and then I started collecting, and then, of course, I bought them and took them home with us. And they went in a drawer in my nightstand. Until my ex made this decision somewhere along the line that he wanted to buy this doll that off of eBay that was supposedly demonically possessed. Excuse me. I didn't know how I felt about whether something could be possessed by a demon or whatever, like some inanimate object. But I didn't like the idea of this thing coming in the house, period. Especially when he did it without letting me know anything ahead of time. Not that that would have mattered at all, because he literally was the type that would, okay. One of the things that I said most often in the last few years we were together was, you're gonna do whatever the fuck you want. Why are you even asking me? It's like, you're not looking for me to say yes or give you the approval on it or anything. You're literally just, honestly, it's got to be the narcissism thing, as I'm thinking about it. Because if I said no, he was gonna coerce me, right? So it was going to go how he wanted it to go anyway, so it didn't matter. But so he gets this doll, right? And of course, when it comes, I leave it out on the front porch because I don't want anything to do with it. And he, of course, makes fun of me because I didn't want anything to do with it. And he, brings it in, puts it on the hutch in the dining room. And, it's got this little story with it, with the demon that supposedly was attached to it, and a little backstory and all this stuff. And I don't like it. Obviously. I just... I know what I felt about things possibly being demonically possessed or not, but I didn't like it. And wouldn't... Okay, even if it... Like, if you just bought something that didn't say it was demonically possessed, but just got it because, he was being an asshole in general, it was just... Most of what he came up with, it's like... I am not interested, but you really don't care. You want me to say, no, I don't want it, so you can do what you want anyway, and keep chipping away at my sense of worth and value, and like that whole idea of, you want me to say yes, but not necessarily. Doesn't even need me to say yes. Because that's one of those ways that, he gets his little supply, because he said no, or I said no, and he still did it, right? And then, of course, I was pissed to some degree for some amount of time, because he was blatantly acting in a means to disrespect me, right? Anyway, so the stupid doll's in the house. Whole energy in the house definitely changed. And he, I feel like he was making the rapey comments before the doll came in the house, but he got a lot worse, because in the last months that we were together, one of the things that he would say a lot was he should have raped me when I had the chance. He said on more than one occasion that he felt himself getting so angry, like at people at work or whatever, that he could see himself accidentally killing somebody someday. This kind of stuff. So, of course, I'm taking note of it, and okay, so one of the things that happened was he had just gotten custody of his son, and we'd moved in with us. His parents had gotten us a camera system for the house to, to make sure, since the kid was being coerced into lying about us with his mom, to keep everybody safe, right? So we had a camera in the living room, and I think they were in 2 different places in the living room. So one night, I go to bed, and I wanted to say it's probably around 3 o'clock in the morning or so, 3 or 4. I hear the Xbox start up, and it's loud enough that I thought the kid was in there trying to sneak time, because he was like obsessed with that damn Xbox. And so, I don't want to get up without knowing what was going on. So I I looked on the camera. It's like nothing's going on in there. The cat's sitting on the chair licking her belly. That was the extent of it. And it was very casual, by the way. All her glory and slouch and everything. But anyway, it's like, I know I heard that thing because it woke me up. It's like, all right, whatever. So I roll back over, and a little bit later, I'm like, my head's facing the closet, and then I turn my head over, and I feel this whole process, right? And for some reason, I have my hand like this on the pillow next to me, and when I move my head over, I see in my hand the head of the stupid doll. And I feel its stupid little plastic head, because it was one of those Cabbage Patch dolls. So it's like that, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it, but it's I could feel it and know that it was that, right? Because I had Cabbage Patch dolls when I was a kid anyway. So I was familiar with that, the feel of their weird heads. Especially little bald ones with the little tuft on the top, right? But I see this thing with its head in my hand, and I feel the head rotate, and its little sticker eyes looking at me. And it scared the shit out of me, and I woke up, right? So I was like right in that space of right almost asleep, but not quite completely there. And like I had this weird experience, and it freaked me the hell out. So I'm immediately like, all right, well, I absolutely would have believed that my ex would have, totally been of the type of person to go and get it and put it there. So that, of course, was the thought that ran through my mind in the process, but he was asleep. So, freaked me out. And I got to looking online about, things to ward off negative energies. And one of the things that it talked about was red jasper. And one of the rocks I had gotten from the little metaphysical shop in New Orleans was red jasper. So I started wearing shorts to bed that had a pocket so I could always have it on me, because I didn't like that experience and didn't want it again, right? And also, going back to the Xbox thing, what I think it was the surround sound hadn't been shut off, and the Xbox did a update. So there was actually something that had happened to wake me up, but it was completely, explainable. But still, like, the next part of it is when I was almost asleep, but I thought I was more awake until I, until I startled myself awake and realized that I had been, dozing. In which case it was like, yeah, ew. So then it's just this whole, I don't like this, right? So I started carrying the red jasper on me, and it, I had to have it on me when I slept, but then also I would carry it during the day. And what I noticed was happening was my ex would start saying the mean things, and it's like I was watching myself, like, within my body, but also kind of removed from my body at some level. And I could see him specifically doing and saying the mean thing to get a reaction. And as I started noticing that more and more, it was like, he's trying to get a reaction. Don't give it to him. So I stopped giving it to him, right? Which made him, like, even more pissed, right? Because he's looking for his narcissistic supply, and I'm not yielding. I'm able to see that he's just trying to pick at me, and so I'm able to be like, no, I'm not, right? Yeah, so I think that is called gray rocking, where you just stop reacting and they don't get what they want, and it absolutely infuriates them, but it helps give you a little bit of clarity, distance, space, I don't know, whatever, all the things. But like, that experience taught me that the rocks work, right? So then I have this other experience where I'm learning about ways to protect my energy, and it starts with rocks, right, as one means. So I learn about, I started going to these classes, and the first thing we start learning about is the rocks. And then also, like, the next week, there were two different classes. The second class, the first week, the first class the first week mainly talked about numbers and how, like, loved ones in spirit and whatnot can communicate from the other side and all this stuff. So, and being through numbers. And it was one of those things, I had been aware that I was starting to see 37 a lot, and it was standing out to me noticeably. And it's like, okay, what does that mean, right? So then we're sitting in this classroom, and we're talking, and she's talking about ways family shows up, and it's like, I wonder if that was my great-grandpa's birthday. It was. March 7th. And, like, I had known that before, But for some reason, I got so far removed from it for a time that I forgot. And then I start seeing 37 everywhere. And then, then suddenly it's this thing that it's like actually being guided, like, like spirits actually checking in, spirit guides, family checking in, and there was 515, which is my great grandmother. Those are some that I see a lot that are more important ones to me. I need to make a potty run, so hold on. Okay, so 37s, right? So that was the first class. The next day, the second class, we talked about the rocks, black obsidian, onyx, which I used to have in my nose. I do have tiger's eye back there. I got a I got a pouch in my pocket that mostly has the black stones, the root chakra type stones, right? So this is like my biggest pouch. There's a few in here that aren't, but most of them are the black stones that were for protective purposes. Also, orange and red and brown are other ones that help with the lower chakras and, protecting your energy, right? So, what we ended on was she said you can also use color. And she was talking about how black is a color that is you can use for shielding and protecting your energy as well. So then I'm thinking, okay, so at a time I didn't know that protecting my energy was even a thing, I end up with these 3 dogs that, they're all black. So it's like there's this other level of energetic protection at a time I didn't even know I needed it, right? So because this is literally the only time in my life that I have ever had black dogs, and I have 3 that are primarily black. So the next week in the first class, we were talking about color too, and she said that she associated color black with source because all things come from the void. And it was like immediately it took on this level of not just protected, but literally divinely protected in a time that I didn't know that I needed any kind of energetic protection, right? And any sort of awareness of protecting my boundaries and whatnot. And, so like all these things were coming together. So how did I get there? The stuff with my family, right? So 2023, that was when I committed my love and career over to the universe to take the lead on. But, early on, it took some time before I was really aware of the protection thing. And like there were things that I could do to protect my energy and all this stuff, right? But I was starting to get the awareness that I needed to look for some assistance in doing that. So then I started taking the classes at Inner Path, which was like first week of January 2024. And, got the rocks. We talked about those a few weeks in that one class. But then like the Mookite was the biggest one. That was the one that I felt especially drawn to because I heard it whispered in my ear as I was waking up. It's like, clearly that is important, right? And then when I looked and saw it had something to do with stopping the generational icky stuff, then I was like, oh, well, it makes sense, right? So like everything with my family, right? One of the biggest reasons I had so much difficulty getting out of the relationship with my ex was because every time I left, he would talk about how I only left because I couldn't do anything without my family and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, and how much they hated him. It's like, did I leave for me or did I leave for them? And then at some point I would go back and then I would realize that he's literally an asshole and I would try it again, right? So it's like, there was at least one time every year that we were together that I tried to leave, but ended up going back ultimately. But like the biggest ones were when we were in Alabama. So the first was right after we had moved down there. The first year it was, 2014, the end of the year, he had 2 months over in Germany for job training. And then he had 2 months at the end of 2014 in Alabama before he went to Germany for 6 months of job training. I don't know if I said that right or not. My brother keeps distracting me. I see and my sister-in-law, there's a group chat with just the three of us, and like I keep having it pop up and it's distracting. Sorry. But anyway, 2015, the summer, we went back to Alabama, and we took his kid with us, because we had him for a little bit. He had just gotten back, or my ex had just gotten back from Germany for this job training and hadn't got to see him a whole lot, but he did get to see him a little bit because the company he worked for paid for us to go out there. So we had a little trip to Germany, but we ended up having him for like 3 weeks, I want to say, in the summer. And in that time, we went down to Alabama and were looking for a place to stay, right? So, like, we started moving a truckload of stuff, or a couple vehicles full of stuff, and stayed in a hotel for a few days as we looked for apartments. So then we ended up in this apartment, and then I took the kid, back up here to go back home and get ready for school. And when I went back down, I took the cat with me and Ziva and all that stuff. So in that time, we were there for about like 4 months-ish. And I survived the anniversary, but the day after the anniversary, I packed my shit and came back up here. And immediately, of course, he was pissed when he got home and I wasn't there, and he starts sending me all sorts of harassing messages and pestering me and all this stuff. But that was always his go-to was, well, of course you're going back there because you can't do anything without your parents. And, how much they hated him and all this stuff. And it's like, every single time, it's like, is this for me or is this for them? I don't know. So inevitably, I would go back. That time, however, I stayed up here to finish out the last semester of my seminary experience, right? So I started taking classes in January 2013, and then graduated in May 2016. And that was my excuse, right? The first semester, or the fall semester, I did mainly like this online thing. I didn't know what I was going to do beyond there because I knew I could do at least a semester where I could do mainly online classes, but I would have to come up like so many times and meet with the instructor. And I did that. It wasn't a problem. But, and interestingly, that class, like, it wasn't an actual class. It was an independent study at 3333. And it was a topic of my choosing. And I don't remember what I even posed it as. I think it had something to do with demonology. But, like, I end up with, like, all these different books that, are, like, ultimately about Satan and all this stuff, right? So it was kind of just an interesting little side note going back to that, which maybe it was a foreshadowing. I don't know. Of my ex with the demonic doll thing and, like, all that crap. I don't remember hardly anything from that independent study. Then, too, 2013 was when I got my TBI, so everything's kind of like, there are things I remember, but then it's like, I don't know how reliable it is that I remember, but whatever. Anyway, so I took the class. It was fine. Got some interesting books out of it. And I think part of it was with the doll I think part of it had to do with the fact that I had taken this class and I was into the scary movies, where they have the demonologist, right? And so like the Conjuring movies and whatnot. And so I think my ex had this sort of silly idea that he was going to make us like Ed and Lorraine Warren. It's like, no. That's not what I want in my life, actually. But they had like the museum with the supposedly possessed doll and the Annabelle doll or whatever. Even more interestingly is once I divorced my ex and my entire belief system, because I realized my belief system was what got me stuck in that situation. I can't stand watching those kind of movies, like anything that's got the blatantly obvious you need Jesus kind of message. It's like, piss off. Not interested. It's like Christianity is bad storytelling. That's basically like the extent of it, right? So 555. Anyway, so the rocks, right? And the leaving all the time, right? So I think it had something to do with when I left in 2017. Because I left in December 2017 after I put a solid case together for his attorney. Like, I got all this information organized. So I made a comment yesterday about my ex's first ex, or about the the online dating thing, and it was basically he was shopping for the next person to help him deal with the shit from before, right? So he had this relationship with this girl who cheats on him. Then she finds out she's pregnant, and at some point in there she did tell him it could potentially be his, but since he walked in on her cheating, he refused to believe that it was, right? It's like, no way. And then the guy ended up claiming it as his own anyway. So when the kid's almost 2, he's married to this other girl at this point in time. Suddenly, please don't. Suddenly, that actually, sky looks cool. It's like all these big gray clouds, and then there's a little sliver of gold. Anyway. Oh, crap. Taz! Hold on. Worth noting, I paused it at 37 minutes and 30 seconds, but that's irrelevant. Anyway, nobody was here, but they had left the garage door open, so they thought they heard stuff. Anyway, so my ex's first ex-wife basically served the purpose of when the kid was first in his life, after paternity had been proved and all that fun stuff, right? She was there for the start of it. And then at some point along the line, she left. And, he, the way he is jumping into the next one right away, right? So, so I don't know how long it had been that he had gotten divorced after I met him. I'm wanting to say it was finalized and then he was on the app pretty quick. And I'm wanting to say it was probably within a year of the divorce that we got married. I don't really remember all those details, but seeing as to how, so I talked about how I got, when it was the approach of, that's driving me nuts, the approach of the first wedding anniversary after the divorce in 2019, I started getting really anxious and stressed out at the possibility of hearing from him again. Then when it didn't happen, I had this memory pop up on Facebook where he had commented on one of my pictures. It was a picture of me and Pepper. So nobody, it's my sister. And, he had some sort of cheesy, gross message. And it was right after we got married, kind of a thing. It was like, ugh. But the memory popping up showed me his little icon in the corner, his little picture was with another girl. And I knew it was intentionally for me, it's supposed to make me feel some kind of way or whatever. I felt relieved. But I knew that him posting the picture with her was specifically for my benefit because the entire time we were together, he never posted pictures of himself, right? And it's like, as soon as, he ends up in this next relationship and he's got a picture of this girl and it pops up on for this memory, and it's like, oh, thank God. It's like, no wonder I haven't heard from him. My cousin, I think, got a little snoopy at one point, and within 9 months of, us, the divorce being finalized, he was remarried again. So it's like, that tracks, right? That completely tracks. But thank God, not my problem anymore, right? So it's like different phases. He had different women to take care of different parts of the journey, right? So there was the one that he was with for the first 3 years of the kid's life. Well, I mean, I don't know what their relationship was like by any means before they found out about the kid being his and started having, having him every other weekend or whatever thing. But I know it was right before the kid turned 4 that I met him. And then I was there for the whole custody journey nightmare thing. And then I left, I think, right before the kid turned 11, after his dad got custody of him. And his dad couldn't have got custody of him without me. And on one hand, the biggest thing is I absolutely hated that it ended up that way. But at the same time, I felt like my ex was so obsessed with looking better than the kid's mom that if the judge said he wanted the kid in therapy, he was going to stick with the same therapist, right? So then when the kid was in therapy, when we first got him, before I left, I got a chance to talk to the therapist without my ex around, and before the kid went back to, to talk to the therapist, and I told him everything that was going on. It's like, look, this is a situation. I even had the documentation from the court-ordered psych eval where the psychiatrist had said needs further testing to rule out narcissistic personality disorder. It's like, so this is a real thing. It's not just me talking all crazy out of my head. It's like, my experience in psychology, my bachelor's degree and whatnot, is like, I was aware of what it was enough. I got that information, but then, I still married it. So the fuck. But I've talked about that plenty of times too. Anyway, the whole point, let's go back to where this all started, right? Which is my family. The biggest thing is the situation with my ex, right? So when I divorced my ex, I divorced my entire belief system because I realized it was the thing that kept me trapped in that relationship. But also, as I've been doing the healing work for that whole situation and everything that I went through with my connection to my ex, figuring out how I got into that position, right? When I first got back, I found this book at the library called Should I Stay or Should I Go by Dr. Ramani. And it's a good book. It's a very good book. Highly recommend if that's your struggle. And one of the things she was talking about was, okay, so how do you get in a relationship with these kind of people? And she was talking about how generally you've already had some type of relationship with these people, right? Like your parents. And at the time I read it the first time, I wasn't ready to really look at the situation with my parents from that level. As I've been doing this whole healing journey thing and stopped getting pulled into the chaos because I started setting my own boundaries and whatnot, it's like I realized that my entire life has been those kind of relationships, right? I'm the black sheep, the scapegoat. That's the biggest thing. Like my grandfather, okay, so this being the anniversary of his death, they went over to the cemetery, and then they're going back over to my grandma's house for dinner. And I told my brother, it's like we're doing the damn funeral all over again, right? And as I've said many times on here, okay, they want to share their happy memories of daddy, right? It's like, I don't have that. And the biggest thing is, you want to know my fondest memory of my grandfather, right? I went over to, he calls the neighbors over because he wants to sit out on the patio. It's a nice day and all this shit. So I go over there with my mom, and my aunt and uncle come out, and the extent of what I remember on the porch was my grandfather was on the swing. I sat down on the other end of the swing, and my mom was sitting in this other chair, and my aunt was on her way over. And I think her husband was a little bit behind her, but also on the way. And my grandfather, because my mom points out that I was signed up for this motorcycle class, right? Motorcycle safety class, because the guy I was dating at the time was really into motorcycles. And so it's like, well, if we're going to do this all the time, I feel like I eventually want to have my own. So I was going to take the safety course, right? So because my mom volunteers this information, my grandfather says, why you always got to do everything different? You got two of the ugliest cats in the world, you got damn geckos, tattoos, and now you're going to take this motorcycle class. The reason it's my favorite moment is because it's the one time I actually stood up for myself. I just looked at him and just said, my sole purpose in life is to piss you off. And left it at that. And he was so stunned, he didn't have anything else to say. But that was the first time I actually really stood up for myself, right? Because I was always taking those kind of remarks, he was always focusing on the thing that was different about me, which, I mean, take your pick, right? Which, I mean, this is all newer stuff. This was 2020. I was still at Amazon, and I still needed somebody else's permission to tell me it was okay to do that. So it was like, I didn't really have friends at the time, and there was like somebody I was talking to off a dating app, and I said, I'm thinking about getting my eyebrow pierced, and he said, do it. And it was like, I just needed somebody to say, you should do this, or go ahead, right? It was a thing that I was thinking about, and then he was in support of it, even though we never met in person. I still needed somebody to say, do it, right? Because it wasn't my family. They would never do that, right? In fact, anytime I have ever gotten a piercing or tattoo, I usually just say, I have an appointment. And then I show up with it, because otherwise, and my mom knows that if I go to Broad Ripple, that's probably where I'm going, although most of my tattoos have been, Franklin for a long time. Or my I've been back up here and separated or split off from my ex, all that crap. So my brother sent me the emoji. The emotionless emoji is our way of notifying each other that our parents are doing something stupid. So, yes. Anyway, the biggest thing in the last year and a half of his life. Uh-oh. He followed it up with, I accidentally sent that to Mom. He sent her messages that he intended for me about her before. Anyway, so it's happened. Whatever. And anyway, I'll see what it is here shortly. So the thing with my grandfather, right? The thing he always did with me was I was the scapegoat. I was the one, he was looking for the thing that was different, and he was going to set in on that. And my mom thought it was so cute and funny when the only thing he had to say in, the last several months to me was, you got a thing in your lip. Because I got my lip pierced in 2023. That was in August. That was when I was working at Honda. And I did so with the intention of the the lip ring and the nose ring. I got both of those at the same time, and I did so. As I did so, I set the intention that I would never again work in a job that asked me to be anything other than 100% who I am. And then, so I had it. So a year and a half practically later, my grandfather's still setting in on, you got a thing on your lip. And my mom thought it was so cute and funny because he forgot I had a thing in my lip. It's like, no, that's not what this is. It's like, he's always doing that. It's like, if we're in a room together, he can't sit there quietly. He's going to point out the thing that's different about me, so I can be reminded that I am not like his people. I'm not his people, right? I am not like the rest of his family. That is acceptable. I'm the one that's a problem, right? So he's dead. A year. Who the fuck cares? Right? But anyway, so they're doing that. I'll probably go get food. If my aunt says anything, if the aunt that always includes everybody and everything says anything, then I might. Otherwise, I'll probably just find something here. Yeah, but it definitely sure shit wasn't going to the cemetery. I kept wanting to say the funeral home. It's like a funeral round two, but it's like, that's literally been my entire life, right? 33 years of my life, since I was 8, was devoted to obsessing over that man's death and like worrying about his death to make him last longer. But that was the big thing. When I started pulling my energy back, it was like, it was really noticeable right away that they started, like, my grandparents and my parents all together, like, their health started, it wasn't doing so good. And then I started telling my brother what I was noticing, and then he started pulling back his energy and, being more mindful of his boundaries, and we got him into all the rocks too, and I hooked him up with some mookaite before. I didn't tell him what it was for until a little bit later either. But the big thing is, when I started the YouTube thing, I wouldn't even talk to my brother about it. Now he's like one of 3 people that knows about it, right, in my family. So my brother knows, well, my brother and his wife and his daughter. However, his daughter isn't allowed to get much of that information because we don't want her slipping around my parents, which she has once. And luckily, I think it went over my mom's head. But yeah, anyway, then there's one cousin that watched all of my videos for a while. It probably hasn't at this point, or hasn't continued with that since then. She's not driving all the time like she was before either. And my aunt, the one that wants to include everybody, right? But she knows she's not allowed to talk to them about it. But the biggest thing was, when I first started it, I think I told my cousin pretty quick, but other than that, I didn't trust my brother back then. It's like, if I say something to him, he's going to slip, and I don't think it's because of any bad intentions on his part. And then once I started doing all this stuff to be mindful of my boundaries, I started giving him like the rocks and stuff, and talking to him about the sage and all this stuff, because I think in 2020 I had a friend, well, she's an online friend mostly, but I've gotten a couple psychic readings from her, and at one point she said I needed to be protective of my energy and I should be saging myself at least once a week. However, that started a thing where I do it like twice a day now. So yeah. Anyway, all the things that I learn, I start sharing with my brother, right? Through doing that, it has also made him a safe space, right? So I can talk to him about the thing, and he knows now that he's not going to, we both know that he's not going to share that stuff. And I told him, when I first told him about starting the channel, it's like, I knew before I couldn't tell you, because if I did, you were going to feel guilt because I was doing something that the family would have a problem with. And I said, in that, I figured you would rat me out. And he said, yeah. Because that was literally how we were raised. We were raised that you're not supposed to have secrets because secrets mean you're doing something wrong. But namely, it meant that, the family couldn't ruin anything that, you were potentially doing. Right? So we were told that it meant you were doing something wrong, but in reality, it's like not telling him everything simply gives us the opportunity to have something that we can keep safe from them, because they are not safe, right? They are very much very toxic and very much dashing dreams, right? Like, but the whole thing, like when my ex was saying you can't do anything without your parents, it's like, I wasn't raised to have my own life. I didn't know what that was supposed to look like, what that could look like even. You know, and I'm pretty confident that my mom was grinning on the inside when she and my dad came to help me move my stuff back up here from Alabama, both the second to last time and the last time. But the second to last time, she made me leave 2 of my dogs behind, which problem number 1. And then, you know, I knew I could not leave them with him confidently, you know, and then he proved me right on that, right? So 5. He got pissed at Gidge for tearing up one of his IU basketball hats, and he took it out on Taz because he didn't like male dogs, but he didn't say that before we got a male dog. But because Gidge did the thing, Gidge was a little puppy that he was trying to make like him better than me. Never worked. And so Taz would spend like 12 to 16 hours a day in the crate while he was at work. And then after he got pissed at the basketball hat, he started making him go back in the cage before bed. And I know there was at least one occasion that he left them both out all night, which, I mean, there was a privacy fence for the backyard, but still. Yeah, anyway. But like all those things, it's like the different levels of, is this me or is this my family? And then once I get into the situation of, it is me and this is shit and we do need out of it, you know, going back to that divorcing the belief system. And also, then realizing how much the fucking toxic upbringing contributed to me getting in the shitty situation. Right? And my grandfather, with his constantly repeating the idea that his family didn't get divorced. It's like, when he started saying that, like, I don't even remember when the first time I heard him say that was, but I do remember at some point along the line, he said it, and I remember thinking that means that is something I am going to be the one that has to go through. And it's like, because he's always saying this thing, and he's essentially, you know, it's like an energetic threat to the rest of the family. Don't make him look bad, you know. So he has the best the article in the paper about him and my grandmother and their happy marriage of, like, I don't remember, I think it was like 40 years at that point in time, maybe 50, I don't know. And, well, in our day, divorce just wasn't an option. You just had to make it work and blah, blah, blah. It's like, you're fucking in a toxic relationship and you're acting like it's a good thing because you stayed married. But you didn't really like each other. That was never a thing. You know, and honestly, okay, so I think my great-grandmother was still alive. My grandfather's mother was still alive when he was dating my grandma. And she basically told my grandma that it was her job to kiss his ass, right? Because he was an only child and he was used to having his ass kissed, and his mommy wanted that to be continued for him, right? Not by doing anybody on this planet any fucking favors. Just continue to make him an awful human, right? And just make him think he's the most special thing that ever was in his mediocre existence where he didn't do shit, right? He lived in the town. He went to his little, I think they called themselves the Limp Dick Society at one point in time. Their little coffee club at the McDonald's every morning at 6 o'clock or whatever for their coffee together and to share their stories like they'd lived some kind of great life. But what do you do? He worked. He was basically a slave to the system. He fulfilled his duty in doing that. And he had the family that stayed together, but was very much abusive. And yeah, fuck it. That's one thing. Like, I had this thought that came up. I know I've heard my grandmother say something as though she were talking to him before. They were together for a lot of years, so it makes sense. But I've also heard that, if older people, as they get closer to death, they hear a lot more, like, basically family members on the other side checking in with them as their time approacheth. And it's kind of making me wonder if that's like the situation with my grandmother, because I know she's not doing great. Also, not concerned about it because she, when I pulled back my energy and started realizing and starting setting boundaries and realizing how I got into such a toxic situation on the, who I married end of things, it was like everything goes back to the family. Well, she's the first line of complacency. She was so worried about keeping his illusion alive and raise the daughters, beat them into submission to doing the right thing, which just meant not making him look bad. Right? And yeah, so like, I don't care. And that's been the biggest thing, is I've heard a lot about my mom trying to make me feel bad about, well, why don't you want to spend time with your grandmother? You used to spend so much time over there and blah, blah, blah. It's like, yeah. What happened was I realized how she was the first line of complacency. She was the, one of the first abusers, because she was beating everybody into submission to keep her, his illusion alive and well. And, she was doing her part. And her doing her part ended up with my mom, who, by the way, okay, so this is another one of those levels of resentment things, right? So my grandmother was the last in the friend group to date my grandfather. And of course, they got married because he knocked her up. Right? So if, my grandmother dates this dude thinking, she wants the experience that her friends had or whatever, and then gets knocked up, then it would make sense that there's some resentment there, because now there's no option in breaking up. Now you have to stay together because you got a kid on the way, so we got to make things look right. And you're going to get, you're going to rush into the marriage and all this crap. And, so going back to what I've talked about like the mother line, and so, okay, so my grandmother, when she was getting ready to give birth to my mother, there had been 3 generations of us together, right? Because my grandmother is pregnant with my mother, who already, as an infant, because baby girls are born with all the eggs they're going to have in their lifetime, one of which becomes me. So 3 generations together, right? So, that whole resentment, if there was in fact resentment, which there's got to be at some level, especially to know that you weren't chosen first. She was the last of the friend group, right? Or there might have been one that didn't get included. I don't know how big the group was. I'm not gonna speculate on those. I've heard in the past, and it's like, it doesn't matter. The point is, she was the one he ended up getting married to because she got knocked up, right? So there wasn't a way out after you get knocked up. You can't deny that you've done anything wrong. So, got to go make it look right. But that locks you into a not necessarily good situation, right? So then in that space of, will you shut up? Trying to keep his illusion alive and resenting the things that got you stuck, right? So that would be my mother. And then also, of course, my mother's going to carry some of that because it's never been dealt with. And then, she enters into this agreement as well with my grandfather of I was the problem and I needed to be stopped, right? Because I was the one that was the truth seer, right? So I would ask questions that made it pretty clear that I was getting things that they didn't know how I was picking up on, maybe. But their means of handling it was to stop it, right? To demonize me at all possible costs, to, tell me over and over again how oversensitive I am, too sensitive, and all the things, right? So, but me being me, who can see the wound everybody's living from, I just turned it in on myself, right? So, you want me to to go have the anniversary morning of his death? No, I'm not going to do it. I don't fucking care. I might want food because I am a little hungry. But if I end up over there, I will be taking my headphones because I don't go around family without my headphones because I don't want to hear their sob stories about him. Because I don't care. He's gone and glory be. Thank God. He's finally gone. Right? But again, like, going back to that point of he made me mourn his death for 33 years and he hadn't died. But 3 months before he died, I couldn't do it anymore. I woke up having that conversation. It's like, I've mourned your death for 33 years and you're not dead. I'm not going to mourn anymore. Right? And like, I've talked about this several times too. The little bit that I cried on the day of the funeral, it was when I was riding with my cousins in the truck on the way to the cemetery. And the only reason I did was because it's like, nobody else has the memories of him that I do. And it's like, is it me? Right? Is there a problem with me? But that was the whole thing. Like, my aunt's calling me, so apparently I'm supposed to go over there. But that was the thing. It's like, I was the one, I didn't have the relationship that anybody else did. Of course, when he moved back when I was 8, that meant that all my cousins who, were born in the span that I was like 12 to 15 years old, they had a completely different relationship with him based on that alone, right? I didn't have that relationship with him. I had that relationship more with my great-grandfather who died when I was 7. So then when it became all about his death, it's like nobody else is ever supposed to do anything. We're not supposed to have any happy moments. It's all supposed to be his fucking death. So, fucking be dead. I don't care. Be dead. Right? That's where I am. But, as I said, I am hungry, so I probably will go eat something, but I ain't sticking around for sob stories because that might be the one that I come up with is I stopped mourning that man's death 3 months before he died. And I haven't picked it up in that time either. And I don't want to. I'm not going to. Right? We're just done. Anyway, enough of that. So, yeah. God, every time I stop now, they just both look at me. Hold on. See if I can. I have a window on my thing now, so, they're ready. As always, I appreciate you. Until the next time. See you.